Okay, let's dive into this, because we are looking at a deeply compelling, yet somehow almost completely forgotten piece of Canadian history today. Welcome to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here with us. We're going to explore the story of a vibrant community, a profound historical erasure, and a father and son's modern-day journey to uncover a truth hiding literally right in their own province. It's a story of incredible resilience, broken promises, and why it's absolutely crucial to remember those who came before us.
So picture this. At first glance, you're looking at a serene, grassy field. Just a quiet plot of land right off Highway 303 in Conway, Nova Scotia, sitting right across the street from a car dealership. It's kind of the place you might drive past 100 times without ever giving it a second thought. And honestly, it is incredibly easy to miss, even when you are actively looking for it. And we know this because that's exactly what happened to 13-year-old Noah Kane and his dad, Sheldon. They made this 2-hour drive all the way from Halifax specifically to find this exact spot. Noah, who's in grade 8, had spent hours online digging into this location for a history project, and he just really wanted to stand right there, next to the history he was writing about. But finding it in person, well, that proved to be a completely different, unexpected challenge.
Because while they were searching, Noah and Sheldon ended up stopping at a local gas station for directions. And Sheldon's reaction to what happened next perfectly captures the whole problem. He asked the staff there if they knew where the Black Cemetery in Conway was. And he says, "They looked at me like I had 5 heads. They had no idea what I was talking about." I mean, just think about that for a second. The locals, working literally right down the road, had absolutely zero clue that this historic site even existed. Now, Sheldon did mention that by a total stroke of luck, there happened to be a black man at the gas station who knew exactly what they were looking for and pointed them in the right direction. But that initial blank stare reaction, that really highlights a profound erasure of local history. Which brings us to the central, striking question of this whole explainer. You see, the cemetery they were looking for is one of the very last physical remnants of a historic black community called Brinley Town. At its peak, this settlement was bustling. We're talking 65 families living on about 75 acres of land. It was actually the second largest black loyalist settlement in the entire province of Nova Scotia, right behind Burgetown. So you really got to wonder, how does a community of that size, with that much deep history, just vanish? How does it fade so completely from the local memory that people working a mile away don't even know it's there? Well, this was the exact mystery Noah Kane set out to solve for his project. A project, by the way, that ended up winning the Delmore Buddy Day Institute's annual African Nova Scotian History Challenge. But to really understand the history he uncovered, we have to travel back in time.
Section 1. The Rise of Brinley Town.
The life of Brinley Town as a thriving hub was remarkably short. Back in 1784, black loyalists who were fleeing the American Revolution started arriving in the Digby area, and things moved fast. By July 1785, Nova Scotia's Governor John Parr officially granted 76 one-acre lots to these black loyalists. That officially established Brinley Town. Yet, fast forward to 1792, just 7 short years later, and the community goes through a massive exodus. The vast majority of its residents packed up and left for Sierra Leone. And this brilliantly illustrates the incredibly compressed time frame of Brinley Town's rise and fall. We are talking about a major settlement that blossomed and then effectively collapsed within a single decade.
Section 2. Broken Promises and Exodus. So, why did this collapse happen so quickly? To understand that, we have to look at the stark contrast between what these people were promised and what was actually delivered. More than 3,000 black loyalists settled in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick in the late 1700s, and they fled the U.S. based on explicit British promises of refuge, freedom, and equal land ownership in Canada. Sounds great, right? But when they actually arrived, that is not at all what they found. The lived reality was deeply rooted in systemic racism. They were given significantly smaller plots of land compared to white settlers. Just look at those 1-acre lots in Brinley Town. 1 acre is barely enough to sustain a family. On top of that, they were paid far, far lower wages for their labor. So the refuge they were promised was, in reality, a landscape of severe inequality and really harsh conditions. Faced with those kinds of overwhelming challenges, a staggering demographic shift occurred. By the early 1790s, about 70% of the residents of Brinley Town made the incredibly difficult decision to pack up once again and leave for Sierra Leone. They were seeking the better life and the equality that had been flat out denied to them in Nova Scotia. The local Methodist Society closed its doors, and Anglican records show their communicants dropping from 50 down to just 8 in a single year. It was an exodus. But what about the 30% who remained? The folks who stayed behind in Nova Scotia, whose history became this almost forgotten mystery.
Section 3. Tracing the Paper Trail.
To find that 30% who stayed behind,
Historians and genealogists have had to dig really deep into the archives. The physical town itself might have dwindled, but the people, they left a verifiable paper trail. Now, what's really interesting about this is the specific labeling used on official government documents at the time. Look at this map compiled from the 1801 Hatfield Grant. If you look closely, you can see the area bounded to the north by Trinity Church lands is explicitly labeled as Negro Town. That was the name Brinley Town became known by in the early 1800s. Roger Vietz, who was the local Anglican minister back then, also referred to it by this exact name in his records. So despite that massive drop in population, the community was still recognized. It was geographically distinct enough to be permanently inked onto the official maps of Digby County.
And that paper trail doesn't stop there. It continues well into the 19th century. Take a look at this. It's an actual property deed dated April 8, 1822. This document is tangible, irrefutable proof that Black residents were still holding onto and conducting transactions for property in Brinley Town decades after the 1792 Exodus. Documents exactly like this one are so incredibly vital because they ground the history in reality. They prove for sure that this wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a continuing, living community. But we really shouldn't just look at these documents as dry legal paperwork, right? Because they represent real human lives. That 1822 deed we just saw, that was signed by a woman named Jane James, identified right there in the document as a Black woman. She was conveying lots 6 and 7 in Brinley Town to a man named Charles Budd, and she signed this legal document by making her mark with an X in exchange for £8. When you read that, the history suddenly stops being abstract and becomes incredibly personal. You can almost see Jane James, who is perhaps the widow or daughter of an original Black loyalist, navigating the legal system of 1822 just to sell her family's 1-acre lots. It really breathes life into those old statistics.
Section 4. Remembering the ancestors. And that human element, that brings us right back to the present day. Back to that quiet, easily missed field on Highway 303. Because the ultimate proof of this community's existence isn't just sitting in 19th century archives, it is literally in the very soil of Conway, Nova Scotia. Today, this site is known in land records as the cemetery used by the colour population or the African Baptist Church. Here are the facts about the site as it stands today. There are at least 67 known burials in this humble little field. Surnames visible on the few surviving stones include Barton and Johnson, and those are names directly linked to the original Black loyalists who settled the area. But unfortunately, many more graves remain entirely unmarked, the stones either worn away by time or maybe they were never placed at all. Amateur genealogist Alistair Barton, who has spent years and years tracing his own family tree back to the Black pioneers of Brinley Town, notes that the challenges, the successes, and the ultimate fate of the people who stayed here, they're mysteries to mostly everyone.
But they aren't entirely erased. Let's move to Panza money and see how this builds a powerful bridge between the past and the present. Look at this weathered gravestone of Mrs. Nina Barton. It's one of the few visible markers left in the cemetery. When Sheldon Kane stood in this field with his son Noah and saw names like Barton and Johnson etched in stone, he felt this profound, deep generational connection. He realized he was looking at the resting place of people who had arrived in Nova Scotia with absolutely nothing, facing immense systemic barriers, and yet they carved out a life.
So, the crucial point is really captured in Sheldon's own words. Reflecting on the sheer resilience of these ancestors, he said, "You've got to start from scratch on your own, like no one's helping you. And to be able to survive and live, it's just like wow." That wow right there, that is the recognition of an incredible human spirit. Because despite the broken promises, despite the systemic racism, despite the fact that 70% of their own community felt compelled to flee across the ocean, those who stayed survived. They lived. They built families whose descendants are still walking around in Nova Scotia today. Sheldon called this trip a generational, lifetime experience that he really hopes his son Noah will one day share with his own children, making sure the memory of Brinley Town doesn't vanish a second time.
The story of Brinley Town shows us just how easily massive, important parts of our heritage can be swallowed up by time and literally paved over by modern roads. A major settlement reduced to a quiet field across from a car dealership, unknown even to the locals. It really makes you wonder, as we wrap up this explainer, what other histories are hiding in plain sight in our own communities? What forgotten legacies are sitting in your own backyard, just waiting for someone curious enough to stop, look closely, and uncover the truth? Thank you so much for joining me today, and hey, keep exploring.